All right, hey, good morning.
Good morning. How are you doing? Good morning. Now we're doing it in the morning. We had a set plan. We did. And our plan was going to be we were going to record at a specific day and time.
Yeah.
And we are like, this is the second time that we've recorded now since we started back up.
Yep.
And we've already changed.
Yep. So if you haven't listened or watched before, so I'm Pastor Albert and that's Pastor Patrick, and the goal of this is to have some discussions that either expand from Sunday or conversations that don't really fit on a Sunday morning. And like I said yesterday during church, our church just doesn't come to evening things. Has never. Like 15 years in, we are not an evening, midweek type of church.
We've tried.
Sunday morning is unreal in the consistency. People show up.
We've tried with.
It's awesome. So anyways, you're getting this. So if you're listening, awesome. If not, you're missing out. We're having a good time.
Yeah, we definitely are. The conversation last week was a good conversation.
So what's a highlight of last week? And I did not prepare you for any of this, but
Like a highlight to my last week?
What do you think? Like, because you're a pastor, and so obviously you must be very close to God. So your highlights must be very high.
Man, yeah, you definitely did not
Prepare you for that.
Well, I think.
Okay, so
a highlight for me
I'll give you
last
some
week.
time. Are you good?
A highlight for last week. There's a few. I enjoyed. Did a random ice cream night with family, and just hanging out, talking to some of the nieces and nephews, and watching them eat ice cream and just smile and laugh. And I think it's a really special time of life and a really cool season. And I just reflect. I reflect back thinking, will I ever be in a space where that would be possible for me? Like, I didn't get married until I was in my mid-30s. I was busy about my life, and God was busy about trying to get me to a place where I was at least, in a state where someone would be like, I'll give him a shot,
Yep.
And it took time. And there's clear evidence of why it should have taken time. So for me to sit there and to be, enjoying an ice cream and just watching all the kids laugh and just carry on and be able to talk with them and some of the cool little relationship things that I'm able to have, it's really cool. Right. It's pretty special, and I'm very blessed. Yeah. How about yourself?
Mine isn't quite as so I think one of the highlights looking back last week was I normally don't really start on sermon prep anymore until Tuesday, Wednesday. So I mean, I have the schedule laid out. I kind of know where we're going. My brain is always going, and so I've got thoughts in my head, but I normally don't start till like midweek, just because Monday, normally you're still pretty wound from the weekend, you're catching up, you get emails. We do most of our, Family Central or Mac meetings will be Monday or Tuesday. We do a lot of our recap from the previous week. So really to launch into hardcore, that's exactly what I want to say. And so last week I really just early on felt like I needed to get this thing done. And then by the end of the week, we had some other situations come up where there was no time. And it was one of those cool little things that I look back and I go, it was neat that without knowing it and without feeling anything spiritual, like it wasn't like God woke me up in the morning and says, go right. It just, the way the week laid out.
You're going to have to make sure you tell me when that happens. Right. So why are you here so early? Well.
I was cool. Like when I look back Sunday morning, and because we do baptism classes now Sunday morning, so that limits some of that, Sunday morning prep time that I normally have. And so it's cool. I felt like it was one of those neat moments where it was like God was clearly already creating a pathway so that by the end of the week, I was not losing my mind that I wasn't ready. It was, no, I'm ready. And I was ready early. But God knew that the weekend was going to require me to be ready early.
And that's hard to do. Like I have a difficult time transitioning my mind after speaking.
Mm-hmm.
Like my brain literally is just endlessly going back over, what did I say? How did I say it? Could I said it a little bit differently? And rehashing the thought, and it's like locked in there.
Right.
And like to be able to start writing Monday, Tuesday,
it's hard.
It's hard.
It really is. It's some of it's discipline, but also some of it's understanding the way your brain works. Like, so years ago when I was here and it was just me, then I could spend 20, 30 hours a week writing these things. But I also didn't have a database of knowledge.
Right.
So everything was new and I had to study everything new. And so there's a lot of basic stuff that I just didn't know, right? And so now you already have a base database. You've walked with God a lot longer. You know people a lot. So there's a lot of, it changes as the longer you go. But I think a lot of it too is just being prepped. And I feel like that's something that we've done well, is to kind of be prepared. Where do we want to go? and then God can kind of change things. Like the testimonies on Sunday, like we did not plan what Abe and Maggie would say,
Right.
but it could not have been it was the best example of what we were trying to preach.
Right.
And it wasn't planned that way. It was just, literally, we took, okay, so we got the, whatever it is, 12 people becoming members. I don't know exactly the number, but we took them and we assigned them Sundays. And it was just, again, it was one of those
things fit.
Right. Like,
Without
how crazy.
trying to orchestrate it.
Right.
You're just following what God is doing and he's putting it together. And that's really cool.
But I think, this will lead us into a little bit of where we want to go, because we never fully know where this is going to go.
Do you, random question.
Oh, okay.
Do you have a hard time going from notes to picking up your Bible and reading and then going back to your notes? Like, is that mind transition difficult for you at all? Because I find it's easier for me if I have my scripture references and my scriptures in my notes.
Right.
And I read them from that paper, then actually picking up my physical Bible and reading from, like, my brain has a hard time, like, okay, I'm going to pick up my Bible and then I'm going to go back to my paper over here. It feels like I'm leaving almost, like and that's, I don't know, I think it's the way my mind works with how I plan it, and I want to stick to my plan.
Yeah.
So if I'm like up there and I'm like, okay, I'm going to read, and then my brain goes, hey, just read it from the scriptures, just open your Bible. And then I have a hard time transitioning back to my notes because I left them, even though I read the same thing.
Right.
It's a weird little. Do you have that issue?
Well, I don't know if I would say it's an issue. I think the way I look at it, so again, the way I craft sermons, my brain runs 24/7. And so I'm endlessly, like, if you were to look at my phone records, I'm endlessly texting myself little notes. So I'll be driving the boys somewhere, driving Josie somewhere, and I'll be like, oh, that's how that would connect. Oh, what about this path? And so I'm constantly processing it. And so when I finally print off my final copy Sunday morning, and then I'll always most of the time I can do this. I won't say 100% of the time, but I'll go say it out loud 2 or 3 times, right? Even 15 years in, having preached hundreds and hundreds of sermons, when I say things out loud, I hear things that I didn't realize in my mind. And so I'll say something, I'll be like, ooh, that sounded harsh, or ooh, that doesn't make any sense. That when I read it, it was fine.
Right.
As soon as I say it out loud, and so then that copy that I print off Sunday morning, I have endless notes on. And you'll see me often on Sunday if I'm at the front. I'll all of a sudden sit down, I'll quickly, okay, cross this out, add this. Because you're the way God at least gifted my brain is like, I'm constantly processing it. And then if I see a theme in worship that I didn't realize, and all of a sudden there's something that really hits me there, I'm like, oh, that's the Holy Spirit. I want to acknowledge that. And so my problem with, and I know people have said this before, like, I'd like it if you'd read the Bible up there. And I get that. I get there's the visual piece of us picking up a physical Bible. I don't like scribbling in my Bible that much. I'm not a fan of it. I do
See,
like,
and that's where when I had a Bible that had more margins, I loved it in that sense, but more from this, not from a teaching, preaching standpoint,
right.
But like just like you're doing with your phone, with your text messaging yourself, little
right.
notes. As I'm reading through, I'm like, oh, that's a cool.
But a lot of it, when I'm reading through scripture, it's not like it's specific to that text.
Right.
It's specific to that sermon.
Right.
So like yesterday, I want to go, okay, well, that first couple of verses in Ephesians, I didn't really want to get stuck on being a prisoner to the Lord, because I felt like I don't have enough time for that. But I do want to pause right after it says, bear with one another. But when you're up there, if, I don't care how long you've spoken, but when you're up there, all of a sudden something happens and somebody walks out or somebody stands up or somebody does something and it throws you off and your brain gets a little confused. I like giving myself those cues where I don't like looking down. I like to look up as much as humanly possible, but if I don't want to make those cues in the Bible, like to me, when I'm writing there, it's more specific to this is, I really this or underline this or highlight this or something. And so that's where the paper just really, really helps me that way. Now, one of the things I do want to get better over the next couple of years, again, and this I've shared before, but I really want to get better at using even less notes. And I know I'm a little old fashioned, so most of the guys I follow don't have paper up there ever. It's all tablet. And I'm super anti-tablet. And I don't know why. I literally have no clue why. I think there's a little part in my brain that...
Oh man, Moses had tablets.
Well, I feel
Sorry.
like, so the weddings, this is where often people like,
yeah.
And then my fear is like, okay, what about if there's a bad glare? Or what about if we have a freak thing where, I can't pull up the notes or something goes
On the tablet and you can't
I'm like,
access it. Yeah.
That's just a stress that I don't want to have. I feel much more confident with a piece of paper. Like, I'm good with it. So anyways, having
almost
said all
funny,
that,
yeah.
but it is interesting. People want to see that, right? Like, and so we've talked a lot about, or in LA when we were there, the one guy said, don't ever let the things that you do that are horizontal distract people from being vertical. And so what he was saying with that was, whatever we plan to do Sunday morning, you can do whatever, but try not to be a distraction. And so, like, if me being up there holding a Bible helps people more connect with God, then you want to do it. But for us, we've just found, like, I find that really hard. I would be the same way. And then I'm going back and forth between things. And again, I think there is a piece where if people listen to me long enough, if they do not hear that my passion and love for Jesus is there, and my passion and love for Scripture is there, I would 100% challenge that. Drawing the line as to having the Bible up there. But I guess that's kind of the explanation as to, why we do it. Because you're trying to be smooth. I realize we live in a world where people have so much content. And so when they do come Sunday, as much as they're eager to learn, you want to give a good presentation. You want to present the gospel clearly and well. Yeah. Anyways, yeah.
No, that was well said.
Teaching is,
There's a lot more to it than just... like I'm constantly thinking how are people going to receive, like I'm trying to get into not necessarily their headspace, but like again when you practice, like that was something that you were like when I first started here, you were like, hey, like make sure you roll through your sermon a few times, read it out loud, read through it, like practice, actually practice going through it. And I was like, that's a really good practice to get into, because I've noticed that the way I write needs to be more like how I talk.
Right.
And that's not really a good way of writing.
Right.
Like in terms of like grammar but like how I need to convey thoughts is typically not like I need to write things on paper the way I would normally talk to somebody.
Right.
And if I can do that, it's a lot easier, because then I don't sound like I'm somebody else when I'm trying to speak.
Right.
But you have to be okay with writing things down that way and not being like so formulated in like in terms of how you're putting it on paper, which is a practice that I really didn't get until I started practicing, sermons out loud. And then I was like, oh, that didn't sound right.
Well, that's one of the things when you look at even the testimonies we had this last Sunday, like people, when they write stuff, they don't factor in emotion. They don't factor in fear. And so a lot of people who can just wing it suck on stage.
Right.
Because they get up there and they're like, oh, I hadn't prepared to be emotional. I hadn't realized it would hit me this hard. I hadn't whatever. And so then people go up there and they just wing it. And you're like, oh, you're missing an opportunity. That's why I loved so much what, Abe and Maggie did on Sunday, and Randy and Gloria the same way. Like, you go up there and you prepare, because these are key moments. Like, again, if we're worshiping God and you get to be up on that stage, like, you get to share your story. Like, that's a treasure. And so then I'm always like, when people go up there and they swing it, I'm like, I think you're missing an opportunity. I think you're downplaying what God can do through your story. But I think the flip side is, if you want to, like, I remember in high school, I don't know how you guys studied, but my studying was like last day before the exam, read as much as I can.
Cram it.
And then by the end of the exam, already 90% is gone. Mm-hmm. I don't want that to be like this. And I felt like there's a piece where when you write down your story and you actually force your brain to think through, you begin to remember. And you go, oh, God did carry me through that. Oh, I remember this. That service did impact me. Oh, you know what I mean? Like all those things because I've lived 42 years. Like I'm not crazy old, but I've experienced a lot in 42 years. Mm-hmm. And so if somebody says, hey, what's your testimony? Well, off the top of my head, I got my few key moments that I remember. But if I write it down and actually give myself time, all of a sudden I go, oh, there was that season that was really hard. And I just kind of drown that out. And so I feel like there's a lot of advantages to it that people downplay. From a teaching standpoint, I'm telling you, if I'm talking, and I get this way sometimes, if I'm bored of what I'm saying, There's no way you guys are going to enjoy it.
Right.
Right? Even if it's smart, even if it's well thought through, if I'm bored, you're going to be bored. And so then when you say it out loud, you kind of catch yourself there. You're like, oh, as I was preparing this Sunday, my thought initially was I wanted to read through Ephesians 4:2-6. And so I wanted to do all three because I really want people to get a grasp. And I like the idea of reading some of the longer texts because I feel like we're so indoctrinated by like 3-minute Facebook clips.
Just little sound bites.
Right. And so we know a little piece of scripture and little this and little that. Whereas if you read a longer thing, but I got up there and then I was like halfway through chapter 5 and I'm like, this is too much. It's not that the text isn't good and it's not that it's just going to be too much and people are going to, in Paul especially because he's smart. He goes kind of all over the place. Like he doesn't really stick to something. He's like, oh, and you know how some of you guys don't believe that he like ascended to heaven? Well, listen, let me explain that. And then he goes, oh yeah, now back to, families. and then he's like, okay, let's talk about husband and wives, but I'm talking about the church. And so there's so much there but if I hadn't read it out loud, and if I hadn't gone through the practice of actually doing that, I would have missed it.
Right.
And so I feel like people, whether it's you're teaching Sunday school, whether you're teaching the kids, even when you're teaching at home, like just because your kid sits there and stares at you doesn't mean they're taking it in.
So I think I don't know who I heard say this, but it would be like having the most beautiful piece of art and like bringing it home and sticking it in like your messy storage garage. And like poorly lit, people would trip over it if they went to go find it. They're just not going to get to like the idea or the image or the thing you're trying to convey to them. Where do you put that? Well, you put it in a nice room that's well lit, that doesn't have something in the way. So when people get to look at it or listen in case of a message, there's nothing blocking them.
Right.
Because you've prepared, like you've thought about how that's going to come to that person. So you've made the pathway accessible to them by how you're presenting it. So it's not a waste of that moment.
Right.
And I feel like looking at it that way in my head, I'm like, well, that makes a lot of sense of why you prepare in a certain way and you think about how it's going to come across and you think about how it connects to the overall theme and you think about, and then how it's going to flow and how you want to present it. And it makes a lot of sense.
So
I didn't expect us to be talking about.
Well, I know, right? But okay, so let's transition from that. One of the things I do want to talk about is something that's really been rattling in my head, and I don't know if I was able to convey this well on Sunday. But so we were meeting in our pastor's meeting the other day. So Mike Wall from Summerfeld was talking about elder training, and he was one of his mentors had told him, as you pick elders, take them out for supper. And he's like, why would I take them out for supper? Like, what are you talking about? And he said, well, one of the things you're going to see in people is how do they treat servers? And so this got this whole conversation going of like, when we think of the church, when we think of, elite leaders and we think of, these higher positions and stuff, so often we bypass really bad behavior and just justify it as well. That, that is what it is. And the more I've been thinking about that, because the whole concept is like, so
because
often,
this person knows like the scriptures or this person
right.
is a good leader.
Right.
And so we bypass.
Right. But then you start looking at, okay, so if we're trying to create a space of following Jesus, who was it that Jesus treated the best? Like who was it that felt loved that would never have felt loved prior to him? And all of it were people that society had, for numbers of reasons, guarded or, described as being less than.
Right.
And so one of the things, if we're being real, like people look down on minimum wage paying jobs.
Right.
They just do. Mm-hmm. And people feel like especially because I worked at McDonald's, I've worked, like we ran the restaurant there at Family Central. I've seen this. People walk in and when you're hungry, you put together the combination of hungry and I paid for it, and they feel justified to treat people like garbage. Mm-hmm. And you see it all the time. And this whole example is so intriguing to me of going, are we justifying a lot of this behavior as just it is what it is? And then I was thinking about what Paul says here. And, when Jesus talks about, okay, you'll be known by your love. And you go, man, if every Christian, if we would just pause long enough to go, okay, why do we justify road rage? Honestly. I'm being completely serious. I make the joke in church often. Why do we justify it? Why when a buddy says they got really angry on the road, we laugh, go, I get it. Why is that okay? right? Or if you're in a restaurant with somebody and the waitress gets the order wrong, why is it okay to treat them poorly? Like, where do we get that? And I feel like there's so many of those tiny little things that we just go, it doesn't matter. It's fine. And then all of a sudden you see, okay, well, that translated to, well, that person all of a sudden treats their spouse like that. And then all of a sudden you're like, well, how did we get there? Well, that's because you've justified all these little things all the way along. And then we end up in this place. And so I feel like there's just I feel like sometimes we kill the word, we need to love each other, but I'm like, I don't know why we justify so much hatred in our culture still. Why we justify, if you read any of the comments online about anything that happens, people are just mean. And some of these people are good people. Why do we justify this? Why do we allow this? Why do we as friends go, you know what, it's okay. Patrick, you behave that way, that's just who you are.
It's so great to hate.
But as a Christian, we're never supposed to be like that. We're never allowed to. We're never supposed to be like, well, it's just a sin I struggle with, who cares? But then on the flip side, then we look at other sins and we go, okay, well, you know, the big thing with gender dysphoria or the big thing with some of these other, okay, those we have to condemn like crazy.
Right. But mistreating your waiter or your kid's coach or the volunteer down at wherever, that's okay. Umpires, yeah. All that stuff is okay. All that stuff is okay.
Yeah. Don't you ever think of like, and this is where my brain is going with a lot of it. Like, so there was a speech I heard years ago by an army general or colonel or something online. And his big thing was, if you want to become a better person, make your bed in the morning. Like, start the day off, do something productive. Do something and you're setting the tone for the day. And then you kind of build from there. And then I'm like, okay, so then for me, when I set the tone for my day, that tone is going to be set in how I treat those closest to me. Because that's my preparation for the battles.
Right.
Because again, if we want God to put us in a place where we can actually make long-term, you know, incredible impact, if we don't train for it in the little ways, like you think of when you start with baseball.
So you're saying basically where you're going with this is that your every day is your practice.
Yeah, every day is your training.
Every day is your training. And if you only train to a certain level, when the fire comes, when the hard moments come, you won't be ready because you didn't train.
Well, Jesus, I think they look at Jesus when he went through the whole thing, like, and so obviously the cross was devastating for him.
Right.
He experienced all the human emotions to it, and somehow we're like, oh, well, he just did it. And was the reason? And I've never thought of this before, and so if it's dumb, and that's okay.
No, this is the forum to say dumb things.
I know, right? We're hiring a new pastor. Was the reason that Jesus needed to be here 33 years was because if he had just come down and died, he could never have just come down and immediately gone to the hardest battle of his life. Like, can you humanly jump to that? But I think we train that way. And then all of a sudden people are faced with something and we're often like, well, like, you need to forgive. And they say, I can't. Well, yeah, that's because you have chosen not to forgive for 20 straight years. So when that person cut you off, you chose to stay bitter. When that person, all these tiny little things, and now all of a sudden you face a massive battle, and the way you've trained your brain is to respond poorly. And so then I look at a lot of this and I go, I think it's not just as simple as saying like, oh, okay, well, if we're going to evangelize, we have to love. But man, if you ever, like, you look at some of the crazy battles that we face in culture, like, people hate each other. You look at, you know, the fact that racism, all this stuff still exists is just absolutely mind-blowing to me. But it just doesn't go anywhere. But then we justify it because we're like, well, I also don't have to love my wife. And I don't have to love my in-laws. And I don't have to love these people. And so we get into a place where we're like, I'm going to allow, as a follower of Jesus, I don't need self-control. I don't need to be gentle. I don't need to be humble because I'm justified. And I feel like all the little things that we allow, the little impurities, but all we ever scream about is the big ones.
Right.
We pick some big key ones that we're like, evil, evil, evil.
But our life is full of little ones.
100%. And so then when you look at how a pastor ends up in a major failing or any of those, it will never have been like he was really good all the way along. It was usually like, okay, so him and his wife, there was a separation. There was something there. Because remember, I don't know if you're here when Jim Van Eeperen was here when we did the whole reconciliation thing. I think it was before your time. But
no, I just came to the reconciliation service. I wasn't part of the whole.
So we had Jim Van Eeperen come out, and so back in the day when we were really battling with reconciliation, they came out to one of the trainings that the church sent us to. So I got to go to something called Arrow Leadership, which was so cool. These guys came out and they talked about church reconciliation, and their whole job was to go in when churches were broken, and they'd go in and they would, spend 2 years with them and try to work towards, a level of healing. And so we had them come out. They spoke at church camp, some of that stuff. But one of the things he said was every time they went there, no matter what it was, no matter what the moral failing was, every time they would go, they would show up, and there would be at least a couple elders and a couple other staff people that would say something to the effect of, I knew something was off, but I said nothing. And we just allowed it. We knew that the behavior seemed off, but there was little things. And so we just allowed those little things to go. And then all of a sudden he has a major failing, because again, that's how you've trained your brain.
Right. And then we're like, oh. So it's like the Matthew 18 thing. So you're supposed to go and talk to the brother. And if that doesn't work, his friend group is supposed to go and talk to the brother.
Right.
And then if that doesn't work, it goes like larger scale.
Right.
To go. And what you're saying is that like these moral failings are also a breakdown, are a clear like visual breakdown of actually where our relationships are at.
Right. I'm trying to remember exactly where it is in here, somewhere in Ephesians 4 or 5. I had it underlined on my other paper, but he talks about speaking the truth in love to each other and quit speaking falsely against your neighbor. And he highlights such simple things. Like, and often where we get stuck in these passages, so Ephesians 4 to 6 is kind of where I was on Sunday, but
25, I think it is.
4 verse 25?
Yeah.
Yeah, therefore, each of you must put off falsehood and speak truthfully to your neighbor. We are all one members of one body. In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. And then it goes into there. But it's interesting. So most Christians would know that do not let the anger go down or the sun go down in your anger. But right before it goes, you need to speak truthfully to each other. We don't do this.
No.
The amount of conversations, and we just had a conversation this morning about something where we were like, people are concerned about this situation, but those people don't go to that person.
Right.
We don't have that conversation that says, hey, you know what, Patrick, this is what bugs me. We'll go to Albert and we'll say, I don't like what Patrick did there. And then but we're just so used to it. And we get this all the time. You get like a men's group or you get a ladies group or you get whatever group. And there's all sorts of conversations but did you have that conversation with that person?
Because it's clearly directing us to direct our conversations to each other. So do we withhold? So is this another one of those examples where like I don't come and talk to you directly? And the reason why I don't come talk to you directly is because I'm angry. And instead of me letting my anger be dealt with correctly, and I confess and yield my anger and I give it to God and I come to you with a right heart, instead of doing that,
right.
I just don't talk to you about it. I keep my anger and I go talk to somebody else because I want to hold on to my anger. And then we actually don't have the conversation that Paul's talking about right here, which would actually resolve the matter or at least challenge you to change or to think about it, which might actually help you with something that is needed to be helped with in your life. So then you never get the help that you need. I avoid dealing with my anger because I want to be better than you or whatever it is that's driving that. If I just let him stay where he's at, then I can continue to think that I have one up on him because I don't do that. Do you see the thing he does? That's terrible.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
I don't do that. So haha,
Yeah, I think there's multiple layers to it. I think that's 100%. I think there's also, at least in my context, the previous generation felt so condemned, and so people spoke a lot of truth, at least the pastors did. There just wasn't love. And so then you were very legalistic and you were very condemned if you didn't follow the things. And so now you get to the other flip side where it's like, well, then I'll just love and I'll have no truth. And so we need to come back to a place where it's like, no, we're going to speak the truth, but it's got to be in love. I think one of the things that has happened in church culture, at least, is that there's just such a high expectation of the pastors can do it. That's why we paid them for it. Right. So can you go talk to so-and-so, their marriage is struggling? Can you talk to so-and-so, they're struggling with this, or whatever that thing is. And we've missed some of we really need to just do this together. So if you have a concern about your brother, you start there. You don't go we can give you some advice. We've done some of those things, but really, so I think it's a cultural thing. And so I think when you talk about, putting off your old self and putting on your new self and dying to your old self, I think it's one of those things that this is a really difficult transition to go from, I don't really want to deal with this, because I think there's also a piece that, so if I go and I say, okay, Patrick, I know you and Juanita are struggling. If I call you out, the only way I can authentically do that is if I'm also willing to walk alongside you, and I don't want to.
I don't want to be bothered.
Nope. Don't tell me about your addiction. Don't tell me about your struggles. I don't want to deal with it. And so I think there's layers to it. I think it's different for people. Some people don't like conflict. I know there's that to it, but I just think, again, it's this whole idea of, if I'm going to love you so much, why would I allow you to fall apart? And so we need to reframe some of that culture. I know this is where I struggle. I am really not the best person at home sometimes to get called out. So Josie would be frustrated with me where I don't always respond the best. And so then what ends up happening is that because I don't respond the best, then she gets nervous about calling me out. And so then you create a culture again where you're like, well, no, if I call him out, then maybe he'll be angry. Right. And it's not like I've done anything crazy. Like I don't want to put this across in the wrong way, but just, like if I'm parenting and I'm angry and she's like, that's not a really good reason to be angry, but I'm like, I don't really need to hear that right now because I'm angry. Right? Like,
I've never been there.
Those little moments.
Never been there.
Where you set the tone.
Right. And remove the freedom of the person who's there to actually be your help, your one who's supposed to be like the most intimately acquainted with your weaknesses and your strengths and wants you to walk with God.
Right.
We take away the ground that they can walk on by how we respond.
Do you think so? Just so interesting. So he says humble and gentle. And I was like, well, that's a weird combination. But okay, so I was thinking about me and Jose, and I was like, the only way we survive this is if I have enough humility to walk up and say I'm sorry, and if she has enough gentleness to keep trying. Because if she pushes and goes, you suck. Well, oh yeah, right? I think it's super interesting when you think about a lot of the things, like it's going to require both. Right? Because it's hard when you call somebody out and they just condemn you and they like, okay, I get it. Right? Like I see the other place I see this, and I'm so excited that I get to use gym analogies now, and I get to be like, I've gone for a couple months.
So now you can talk about the gym.
I used to use a lot of them.
So listen, this is how you do squats.
Yeah, everybody's like, you've never even been in a gym shop, Lowen. But okay, so I had Mike Sawatsky the other day comes over to me and goes, hey, you're doing that wrong. You hurt yourself. And I'm like, dude, I appreciate that. But I can tell you, I've watched some weird things in there.
Oh, yeah.
And I don't say squat. Because I'm like, I don't know if I know them well enough. I don't want to be that guy. Like, look at me. Do I look like the guy that knows everything?
So
you don't want to be the guy walking around everybody going like, could you correct that? Could you correct that? But then you go, okay, well, the reason Mike could say it to me was because he knew me. And so he felt confident enough in that relationship to go, okay, I'm going to go say something. And so then when we talk about these conversations, often in the church, people are like, well, no, just the people around you. People you know. You don't need to go to strangers 5 pews ahead of you and be like, I don't think you should talk to your wife that way. No, because the people around them should be doing it.
Right.
Right? You have to have that relationship. That's where the truth and love, but are you willing to walk alongside them? And I think that's actually, if we're going to be honest, I think that's a lot of it. I don't actually want to. I don't want to know your problems.
So I know we talked about like creating space for God to be able to do things and for us to be able to listen, slow down enough that God can speak, put ourselves in positions where, God has like we talked about, the reason why God speaks to people when you go on a mission trip is not necessarily the work you're doing there. Some people might get impacted, but it's more because you've set aside space for now you to actually like hear God and for God to speak again to you like he's been trying to, but like inside of like our busyness, we actually we've almost like spaced out our time so that I don't have time to go talk to that guy.
Right.
Because I know it's going to cost me a couple hours every 3 days.
Right.
And man, my life is busy. I just can't make that work. Like, but the busyness has been put there intentionally.
Right.
So we can say we don't have the time rather than love in a way that is actually the way Jesus asks us to.
Right. Well, so I actually had a rant in my sermon about this, and then I cut it out.
Oh, you did? You had a rant? You ranted?
Just a little. Okay, so I think some of it is we need to reframe that whole phrase. So, A, we need margin. We don't give ourselves margin. I think you need a little bit of margin if you're going to, love random people at random times. But I think the second is that be okay that you've made different choices. Busyness I think it is one of the stupidest words. Define busy for me. What does that mean? Like you did a lot in 24 hours?
So is that busy as a single person, busy as a couple, busy as newlyweds?
Even then, what does it mean?
Busy with one kid.
When you say you were busy last week, what are you trying to articulate to me?
Typically speaking, people are trying to articulate that they have important things to do.
There you go. And I don't have more time for anything else. But the busyness becomes the excuse instead of being like, no, I have prioritized certain things in my life and I do not have any more time. And I feel like when you start saying it that way, like you A, don't feel guilty, and B, you have to actually start thinking about that. Like, okay, so right now in this stage of my life, I am disappointing tons of people because I don't have time for them. And that is all by choice. I have chosen that I believe that God has called me to be a good dad. I have 4 kids still at home. I don't get to spend as much time with the 3 that don't live at home as I do the 4 that are home. I don't have as much time to spend with my parents as I would like, siblings, all that kind of stuff. But when I get to the end of the week, if I just use a cop-out and say, well, I was busy. No, busy, unless you're just wasting your time and you're like, oh, I was busy around. If you use your 24 hours a day well, and you're content with that and you felt like you've invested them well, I don't know why you don't need to feel guilty about anything. But again, it's a reframe thing. I was busy. What busy basically means is I didn't have time for anything else, or I didn't have time for anything. And I want you to know that, I didn't just waste my time.
Right.
But busy to me is just such a dumb phrase.
So we should, yeah.
I don't know. Like,
I think there's also, if you start talking in a certain way, like you're saying things like, I have prioritized this over that.
Right.
I think that's it's also a revealer in senses as well, because you're being more honest about what you value.
Right.
And at least your value system.
Right.
And I think that's why people go to busy, because then they don't have to explain some of that.
Well, the other thing I think is busy allows us to be unintentional. If I say I'm just busy, yes, I drove lots. I went all over the place. I did all sorts of things. Were you intentional, or were you just allowing your day to just get away from you? And so busy, I think, often can be a bit of a cry for help. But I think I spend 24 hours, so do you. You driving more places does not make you more useful, or you driving less. Spend your 24 well.
Right.
And be intentional with it. But anyways, I don't even know how long we've gone.
We've gone like almost 40 minutes.
That is fantastic. I think in closing, here's kind of my thoughts, and then I'll give you a final word. But I think in closing, my conviction right now is to deal more with the little sins so that I can gain more victory in the big ones. And as I was thinking about like there's a philosophy of getting out of debt. When you have 10 different debts, you start with all the small ones and you pay them off as you prepare for them. And often I feel like in life we end up, there's one big one that you're struggling with, and then you end up just focusing on that, but all these other ones add into it.
Right.
So I'm battling with, I don't know, anxiety or stress or porn or whatever your thing is, and that becomes the only focus. But then you have all these other things that end up triggering that. Well, I feel guilty about the way I treated my kids, or I feel guilty about what I did here, and then that your response often is to go back to that sin.
Right.
And I think, yes, it is a small little sin to have road rage, unless you actually act out on it. It is a small little sin to be rude to your server, right? Not to be abusive, but just to be rude. Those are small little things, but they're all little things that rewire. Why do you think you get to treat your server that way? Why do you think you get to treat anybody that way? Hold the door, be kind, be nice. Tip. Maybe the server's having a terrible day. Why do you think just because she wasn't able to, or he wasn't able to do exactly what you wanted at the exact time, why did they not get a tip that day? Right? Like, so I think there's those tiny little things, and I think that builds momentum and prepares you to battle some of the bigger ones instead of always just pointing out the few big ones. Like you think about Jesus talking about the judgment thing. He's like, why do you work on the speck of And somebody else thought, well, you got 2x4 in your own. I think it's a bit of a revealer. Like, again, you have these things in your life that you just kind of let grow. That 2x4 didn't start as a 2x4. My guess is Jesus was trying to say, like, there's obvious things that you've just kind of ignored. Well, if you treat, and this goes back to that analogy, but if you treat your server poor and you continue in that behavior, you will feel more and more justified in treating others poor. More and more justified, more. So anyways, I think that's a big thing with church is less focus on always just the massive things and really hammering down on some of the little ones. Love the person sitting in the pew beside you. Be gracious. Be the first to be, humble. When you mess up, be the first to say sorry. When somebody does say sorry, be gentle enough to go, even though I'm angry. Right?
Yeah.
And that's just normal family stuff, normal work stuff, and even in the office.
Have kids around you because they'll remind you of all the little things that bug you.
And then I remind them of 1 Corinthians 13. Keep no wrist in that. Sorry.
No, well said. Couldn't agree more. Let's focus on the little ones and love each other.
Awesome. Episode 2 done. It's good.
Yeah.
I enjoy processing this. So whether you watch, listen.
What do people say? Like, share,
subscribe. Yeah.
We don't have.
We have no illusions of growing big. What we want is we just want for people who want more content, for people who want to hear some expanded stuff. That's that. So if you got questions, you got something we want to talk about, let us know. Other than that, God bless. Have a great day. Love you all.